So quite a few Americans have figured out that MAGA, which is the slogan that got Donald Trump elected, is inherently racist because there's never been a time in America for African Americans where it's been great. That's the point. White people in America are tired of feeling ashamed of their own history, and furthermore, are ahistorical. They don't believe in history. And quite frankly, it's easy not to believe in history when you've been taught history the wrong way. You've been taught propaganda. Abraham Lincoln may have been part of a movement to free slaves, but he never ever envisioned an integrated society. You can go back and look. I mean, it's quite shameful how every single white American leader in the past was racist. This is a fact. You've got two choices now as Americans. You can admit that the country is racist and try to figure out a way to get around that. We used to say reparations, 40 acres and a mule, Spike Lee's, name for his movie theater, I think. We used to talk about these things. I think that ship has sailed. So the question is, if that ship has sailed, what else can be done to overcome this obvious gap in a great America that never was, and a people that don't want to admit to themselves that what they are fundamentally Europe's rejects. In other words, the European refugees who would have never come to America had they succeeded in America, or had they, as European Christians, succeeded in getting along with each other. Now, understandably, the whites in America have a lot of economic success, just like the Germans in the way back when. They don't want to be seen as failures from another country or rejects, but that's what they are. They wouldn't be there unless they had failed in Europe. So, for them to understand that, they'd have to sort of put themselves in the shoes of the Palestinians or other people who are caught in circumstances that are beyond their control. But the whites in America have money. They're doing very well for themselves, just like the Germans. They don't have to put themselves in anybody's shoes that's not as successful economically as they are. So rather than looking at themselves as part of an empire founded by racist business people that were rejects in Europe, that were basically unable to get anything done until they started importing African labor, they've decided to invent history, and when that failed, they've decided to just forget about it. But the rest of the world isn't going to forget about history. The rest of the world knows history very well. I think it was Samuel, somebody else, who talked about the fact that America's success is really based on Samuel Huntington. I think he was the one who talked about a clash of civilizations. What he said was, ultimately, we as Americans forget that our success has been based on a form of organized violence. But the rest of the world has not forgotten that and never will. So now we do have a clash, not necessarily of civilizations, but of people who remember history and people who don't want to. And that's really the fundamental crisis that the United States is going through right now. How is it going to be solved? Well, I don't know. I'm not in America. I'm in a foreign country. People here, almost everywhere else, they care about history. But in America, there's no point in even having a discussion with an average American about history because they've gotten their minds trained by school teachers in a way that is not conducive to understanding where they come from. And honestly, why would they want to believe that they are also, like so many other people, part of a overall human failure? In other words, if we were successful as human beings, we wouldn't have so many refugees. And the trick that the Americans have is they've made their ancestors immigrants, a nation of immigrants. And what that does is that it masks its real history, where you had Protestants and Catholics fighting over religious differences in Europe that then, depending on the time period, alternately, fled Europe and came to the United States, after which you had segregation based on religion and then based on race once they figured out, hey, look, we can get all these people over here in ways that are immoral, but that help economics. And actually, you have to remember, the United States wasn't really economically successful until after World War II. So what really helped the United States, right, build an empire was these two oceans that protected the United States and its people for a long time, while everyone else in Europe was fighting land wars. And ultimately, what's happening now is that sea-based advantage, that geographic isolation, the advantage of being geographically isolated, that advantage has gone away. So if you think about the United States, in one way, as a nation of failed Europeans that were protected by nature, a natural location, being far away from the problems of Europe and protected by two oceans in a time when it was quite difficult to get across these oceans to attack anybody. When you think about that advantage going away, you're stuck with a reversion to the mean, namely the rise of Asia, which is where I am right now. And so the United States is really forced to confront the possibility that it's not superior to anybody. It's not unique to anybody. It was just blessed with geographic superiority during a particular point in time when weapons were not as advanced. And now that advantage in weaponry has gone away, the advantage in not necessarily weaponry, but the advantage of these oceans providing natural protection, that's gone away. So if that's the case, there's a possibility that America is really just a nation of failed Europeans that exploited labor in order to advantage themselves economically. And ultimately, every one of America's founders owned slaves. I think we talk about John Adams not owning slaves, but whoever was the one guy who didn't own slaves directly, his wife owned them. So all of them were part of families that owned slaves. Why? They were all business people. They weren't really politicians. This is what gets forgotten. They came to America to trade with Europe. That's what happened with the Boston Tea Party. They're trying to ship stuff over there, and the king keeps trying to take a bigger cut. And so these business people said, screw this, let's go ahead and go to war. They went to war over money, basically. Not freedom, money. They were business people. They were shipping, they came over here, and basically some of them couldn't actually go back, had to come up with a business, started shipping to Europe. These were business people for the most part. So I don't know why it's surprising that a businessman has been elected as president and is now just being transparent about the whole thing, about what most Americans who are white think of themselves as, which is effectively a great people rather than what they really are, which is the progeny of racist leaders who failed in Europe. But why would you want to think of yourself that way? That would be terrible, right? Maybe. But if you have some humility, you can think of the whole world as having failed because of the number of refugees we have today. That's probably a more conducive viewpoint. But if you're an American or a German in 1935 or whatever, you don't want to think that way. You want to sit down and enjoy your luxury, enjoy your nice house, your indoor plumbing, whatever new innovation has come up. You don't want to think about the past, or maybe that forces you to think about somebody else, in a different time period that could have been you. So here we are. Some of us have left, and we've given up on the United States. I think that's a justifiable viewpoint to have right now, given the election, which, by the way, Donald Trump deserved to win. So it's not only that the ahistorical politicians have won and have promoted and promulgated a vision of America that is divorced from realistic historical facts. It's that the other side is basically feckless, insipid, and, for lack of a better word, uninspirational. So what do you do when you're caught between an ahistorical group of people that don't want to remember history at all and people who are allegedly against them that don't really have the proper tools rhetorically or legally or really economically to get things done. Because they don't have a vision really that's not based on sort of pointing a finger at people in power and saying, well, you guys are racist and your parents were probably racist and your grandparents were racist. They don't really seem to have a step after that. Whereas for me, it's more of a situation where I'm saying that these people are racist so that we can sort of move on, right? I'm saying that you come from a racist background. Fine, but here we are. Let's try to make it work. How do we make it work, right? Given that, we are in a country that lacks a moral history, at least from most of its time period, right? Not all of its time period, but most of it. How do we go from there? So I don't think the Democratic Party, which represents the people I just talked about who are feckless and, just basically incompetent, I don't think they really have had a strategy other than pointing fingers or becoming part of the system where they don't point fingers, right? In which case they also become ahistorical like President Obama, effectively, right? Who was used by the military to bomb more brown people than his white predecessor. So what do? I think the solution, let's try to end it here, it's late for me, is ultimately to say, yes, we live in a country that was founded on racism and terrorism. That is oftentimes the history of a country. What allows us to stand tall is the fact that we managed, despite our ancestors' failures, to create a world, a country, and a world, by the way, depending on how much power you have, where people were able to overcome their differences religiously and otherwise, racially and so on and so forth. And they did that by understanding, ultimately, that power comes and goes. Technology can protect you today, maybe not tomorrow. And sometimes it might cost so much money to gain that protection that you need that it might cause other kinds of issues. So ultimately, the bottom line is, where do we go from here? And what we do is we try to fix our ancestors' mistakes by creating a better society. The Americans did this in Germany and in Japan after World War II. They created a better society than what exists in the United States today. That's one of the reasons why Germany took in quite a few refugees. I don't think they took in as many as Jordan or Turkey or Iran or whatnot. Those countries don't get enough credit for all the people they took in, including Andre Agassi's father, I think, but I'm not 100% sure about that. So, again, we're going to come together and we're going to say to ourselves that we come from a history that forces us to be humble. And yet, at the same time, when I look at you and you look at me, I want to create a society where we're both looking towards the future, where we can acknowledge our past and the sins of our forefathers while knowing that the only way to bypass them and to prove to everyone else and my neighbor and my children that I am not responsible for their sins is by creating a more perfect society. It's pretty simple, right? I'm about to go to bed. I'm just sort of, speaking off the cuff. I don't think any Democrat has said anything like this. And this is, again, the liberal party in the United States. Donald Trump deserved to win. The soft white supremacy of the United States is back. That's what the United States has always been like. It's just that now it's front and center. I don't see a problem with that, right? Again, I'm not in the country right now. That's what America has always been like. So when I look at an American, I don't see an American anymore. I see a German or an Irishman, somebody that failed in Europe and is now repeating those same mistakes in the United States. In other words, repeating the sins of his forefathers. It's human nature. Why are we so surprised? Because we're special? We're better than the Russians, who, by the way, beat Hitler and Napoleon. I mean, we're better than everybody. We're better than the Germans? Really? We still got Volkswagen and People's Car, I think. And what's the other one? Adidas, who still have those companies, right? Didn't they invent the submarine effectively, the U-boat or whatnot? Were better than those people? All of them? You know how many philosophers they had with German last names? Schopenhauer, you know. Anyway, we're better than those people? Really? Well, maybe we're just all human beings. And all we're doing now is ultimately falling prey to human nature. At the same time, the inherent advantages, geographically and otherwise, for the United States, they're all going away. So we're left with nothing but ourselves to look at. A nation of failed Europeans, creating the same problems in Europe. Don't believe me? Check out the influence of the Catholic Church in America and then compare that with Europe. To be more specific, majority of the Supreme Court in America is Catholic. Former president was Catholic. The vice president now is Catholic. The wife's president, the wife of the president is Catholic. I think Pelosi, who was representing the quote-unquote liberal faction before, who was, I think, in office as the House leader for quite some time, Catholic. It's Europe all over again. Don't be so surprised.